No empire in human history has ever truly collapsed because of a lost war on the battlefield. They wither and die because of a broken currency. The date was February 26, 2022, a day that will be etched into the archives of financial warfare. On that morning, the U.S. Treasury did not launch a kinetic strike. They simply pressed a button and effectively deleted $300 billion of Russian sovereign reserves. This was the moment the neutral dollar myth finally died. If the world's ultimate safe haven can be turned off like a subscription service, every nation is left with one haunting question: who is truly safe in a system where your wealth is a hostage to someone else's foreign policy? History is repeating its most dangerous pattern, and this time there is no reset button. While the headlines scream of a sudden collapse, the reality of the global financial stage is far more complex. The reality of the global financial stage is far more complex, existing in a state of cognitive dissonance, where two opposing truths are evolving simultaneously. On one side of the ledger, we are witnessing the birth of a sophisticated parallel financial infrastructure designed specifically to bypass American oversight. This isn't a theoretical protest. It is a multi-billion-dollar engineering project led by the BRICS Plus nations. Consider the Cross-Border Interbank Payment System, or CIPS, China's answer to the Western-led SWIFT network. In 2024 alone, CIPS processed over 175 trillion RMB in transactions, a staggering 42% increase in value from the previous year. Its network now reaches into 189 countries, connecting nearly 5,000 banking institutions. This is the digital architecture of a new world, one where the yuan is no longer a localized currency, but a global challenger. Even more disruptive is the mBridge project, a digital currency platform that allows central banks to settle trades instantly without ever touching a U.S. intermediary. Since its inception in 2022, transaction volumes on this platform have exploded by 2,500 times, surpassing $55 billion. In this arena, the digital yuan accounts for 95% of the volume, providing a high-tech escape hatch for trade in energy and commodities. To the casual observer, it looks like the dollar's exit strategy is already being executed. But then we look at the other side of the ledger, where a cold, structural reality remains unchanged. Despite the noise of the BRICS Revolt, the US dollar remains the undisputed master of global commerce, involved in 88% of all foreign exchange trades. The reason isn't sentiment, it's liquidity. The US dollar remains the undisputed master of global commerce, involved in 88% of all foreign exchange trades. Treasury market, valued at over $27 trillion, is the deepest and most liquid pool of capital on the planet. No other market in existence, not the euro, and certainly not the yuan, can offer global central banks enough high-quality safe assets to park their wealth. China's own currency remains shackled by strict capital controls, making international investors hesitant to hold a currency they might not be able to move freely during a crisis. The paradox is striking. While nations are desperate to diversify, they are finding a scarcity of good alternatives. Even CIPS, for all its growth, still relies on the SWIFT messaging system for over 80% of its transactions. We are watching a world that is frantically building a new house while still being forced to live in the old one, because the new roof isn't finished yet. The rebellion is real, but the dependency is structural. Every major power is currently trapped in a game of financial chess, where they must attack the king while simultaneously praying he doesn't fall too fast and crush the board. We are living in a financial superposition. The king is dying, yet there is no throne for a successor. To understand why the global financial architecture is cracking, we must look beyond the noise of political speeches and examine the most primal human emotion, fear. The narrative often pushed is that the shift away from the dollar is fueled by anti-American sentiment, but the data suggests something far more clinical. It is a strategic retreat from systemic vulnerability. History provides the context. In 1971, the Nixon shock unilaterally severed the dollar from gold, forcing the world into a fiat system backed only by trust in the United States. For 50 years, that trust was the bedrock of global trade. But in February 2022, that bedrock shattered when the US and its allies froze $300 billion of Russian central bank assets. This was the financial equivalent of a nuclear strike. It sent a chilling signal to every capital from Riyadh to New Delhi. Your national wealth is only yours, as long as your foreign policy aligns with Washington. This is the birth of the hostage economy. When the world's primary reserve currency is used as a weapon, it ceases to be a neutral utility and becomes a tool of compliance. The motive for de-dollarization isn't necessarily a desire to see America fail. It is a desperate need for sovereign insurance. If the kill switch exists, any rational actor must assume it will eventually be used against them. We are seeing this reflected in the cold mathematics of central bank reserves. Global institutions are currently accumulating gold at the most aggressive rate seen since 1967, the era just before the collapse of the London gold pool. China has increased its gold holdings by 18% since late 2022, while India's gold reserves have surged to over 13% of its total holdings by early 2026. They aren't just buying a metal, they are buying an exit from a system that can be turned off at a moment's notice. The numbers regarding US fiscal health only add to this systemic anxiety. With a national debt exceeding $34 trillion, more than 124% of the nation's GDP, the world is watching a superpower export its own inflation to the rest of the globe. Every time the Federal Reserve raises rates to combat domestic issues, it triggers capital flight and currency devaluation in emerging markets. The world is tired of being the collateral damage of a single nation's balance sheet. This isn't just a challenge to American hegemony, it is a global quest for self-preservation. The problem isn't who hates the dollar, it's who dares to hold it when the wind changes. Fear is a more powerful architect than any trade agreement. There is a profound, almost tragic irony in this global uprising. While the BRICS nations gather in gilded halls to announce the end of the American era, they are simultaneously tethered to the very system they claim to be dismantling. This is the paradox of choice. The world desperately wants to divorce the dollar, but it cannot afford to lose the husband. Consider the position of China, the primary architect of this new financial order. Beijing has spent a decade building the cross-border interbank payment system CIPS to challenge SWIFT. Yet the cold mathematics of trade reveal a painful truth. China's massive industrial engine relies on the American consumer. You cannot burn the house of your biggest customer while you are still sleeping in their basement. To truly replace the dollar, China would need to open its capital accounts and allow the yuan to float freely. But doing so would invite the very volatility and loss of control that the Communist Party fears most. They want the prestige of a global reserve currency without the transparency and risk that comes with it. Russia provides an even sharper example of this dry satire. After being severed from the Western financial system, Moscow pivoted toward the petro-yuan and bilateral trade with India and China. But how do you value a barrel of true Jail's crude? You price it in dollar equivalents. Even as they use alternative rails like Mirage or CIPS, the underlying benchmark remains the greenback. They are running away from the dollar using a map drawn by the U.S. and a map drawn by the U.S. Treasury. It is the financial equivalent of a rebellious teenager claiming independence, while still using their parents' credit card to buy the getaway car. The absurdity extends to the BRICS Plus collective itself. This is not a monolith of shared values. It is a marriage of convenience between rivals. India, for instance, has no interest in trading one master in Washington for another in Beijing. New Delhi continues to balance its participation in BRICS with its deep-seated need for U.S. investment and security cooperation. This internal friction ensures that any BRICS currency remains a fever dream of analysts rather than a functional reality. The Global South wants a system without America, but they still need the American market to prove that their new system is safe. They need the deep liquidity of the $27 trillion U.S. Treasury market to anchor their own stability. This brings us to the 10 Nuo strategy. China's attempt to move flexibly on a tightrope. They are liquidating U.S. treasuries, cutting their holdings by over 27% in just 2 years, only to reinvest those funds into other dollar-denominated assets like agency bonds or private equity. They are not leaving the dollar, they are just changing rooms within the same hotel. It is a slow-motion revolt where the revolutionaries are terrified of winning too quickly. A sudden dollar collapse would evaporate the value of the trillions in reserves these nations still hold, triggering a global depression that would topple their own regimes. They are trapped in a cycle of calculated sabotage and reluctant support. It is a divorce, where neither party can afford to move out of the house. Forget the dramatic fantasies of a single BRICS currency or the sudden cinematic collapse of the United States dollar. The evidence points to a much messier, more chaotic reality. We are not moving toward a new global king. We are moving toward anarchy. The financial world is undergoing a balkanization, a fragmentation where the unified global highway of the dollar is being torn up and replaced by a series of disconnected regional dirt roads. This is the rise of currency blocs. Imagine a world where Europe huddles behind the euro, China enforces the RMB within its sphere of influence, and India demands rupees for its exports. In this emerging multipolar order, trade is no longer a seamless global flow, but a series of friction-filled negotiations. We are already seeing this in the energy sector, with the birth of the petro-yuan. When oil, the lifeblood of the global economy, is priced in multiple currencies, it creates a fragmentation in pricing that breeds massive volatility and complexity. The historical parallel is haunting. When the Roman denarius lost its status as the global standard of antiquity, the vast integrated trade routes of the empire didn't just find a new currency, they shattered. Local lords minted their own debased coins, transaction costs skyrocketed, and the efficiency of the known world withered for centuries. We are facing a digital version of this dark age. A fragmented system means the death of the global standard. For the average investor or business owner, this means higher transaction fees. As you navigate a web of incompatible payment rails, it means currency risk that cannot be easily hedged, and an end to the era of predictable global pricing. The efficiency that the dollar provided, a single language for value, is being sacrificed on the altar of geopolitical autonomy. Experts like Eswar Prasad point out that this diversification is reaching its limits because there is a fundamental scarcity of high-quality alternative assets. There is no other market deep enough to catch the world if it falls from the dollar. Yet the momentum toward this fractured future is described by some as an inevitable trend. We are witnessing the emergence of a world characterized by regional currency blocs and increased volatility as nations struggle with the complexities of this multipolar landscape. This transition will be long, difficult, and fraught with risk. It will require an unprecedented level of global cooperation through forums like the G20, just to prevent total financial meltdown. But as trust between superpowers continues to evaporate, that cooperation looks more like a luxury we can no longer afford. The world isn't moving to a new currency. The world is moving to 1,000 different standards at once. What we are witnessing today is not merely a diplomatic spat or a temporary market correction. The $34 trillion U.S. national debt is no longer just a digital counter on a clock in Manhattan. It has become a financial gravity well, a massive distortion in the fabric of the global economy that is pulling the entire post-war architecture into a black hole of uncertainty. As of early 2026, with federal debt exceeding 124% of GDP, the mathematical reality is beginning to override political rhetoric. In 1944, at Bretton Woods, the dollar was backed by the physical certainty of gold. Today it is backed by nothing more than trust in U.S. institutions, in the rule of law, and in the sustainability of the American tax base. But trust is the only commodity in existence that you cannot print. The old world, characterized by a single, neutral, and predictable global standard, is gone. It was erased the moment the world's reserve currency was transformed into a tool of geopolitical enforcement. We are entering a fragmented era where your financial safety depends on which bloc you reside in, and how well you can navigate a landscape of rising costs and vanishing transparency. There are no easy fixes here, and there is no reset button to take us back to the stability of the past. The system isn't just changing, it is breaking apart into 1,000 different standards at once. If you finally see the pattern that the mainstream media is choosing to ignore, press 1 inch in the comments. It is time to recognize the game for what it truly is. This is financial money history. The next chapter is being written in real time. Make sure you're not the one being written off.